The year was 2147, and Earth stood at the precipice of its greatest diplomatic achievement. For decades, humanity had expanded beyond its solar system, encountering countless alien civilizations, some hostile, others indifferent. But none were as powerful as the Zevran Imperium, a vast interstellar empire that had subjugated hundreds of species under its iron rule. Earth's leaders knew that outright war with the Imperium would mean extinction. Instead, they pursued a different path: diplomacy. For over a decade, Earth's finest ambassadors worked tirelessly to secure an alliance that would allow humanity to exist as an autonomous partner within the Imperium. If successful, this agreement would grant Earth access to Zevran technology, protection, and a place among the galaxy's ruling powers. And the man leading these negotiations was Ambassador Alexander Kale. Alexander Kale was more than a diplomat. He was a symbol of Earth's hope. A man of unwavering principles, he had spent his life believing that peace was always the better path, that war was only a failure of understanding. His son, Adrian Kale, had always admired him, even if they had chosen different paths. While his father pursued diplomacy, Adrian had served in Earth's Black Spectre Division, a clandestine military force specializing in espionage, sabotage, and assassination. Father and son had often debated their philosophies. Alexander believed that words were stronger than weapons. Adrian, hardened by years in the field, knew that words only worked when backed by the promise of force. Despite their differences, Adrian respected his father's mission. He wanted to believe that peace was possible. He wanted to believe that his father was right. But that belief was shattered on the day of the Galactic Concord. The Day of Betrayal. The Galactic Concord was held once every 10 years on the Zevran homeworld, Zevran Prime. It was a ceremonial event where the Imperium would review alliances, settle disputes, and, in rare cases, welcome new members into its ranks. This time, Earth was the guest of honor. Alexander Kale led Earth's delegation, accompanied by top officials, diplomats, and security personnel. The Grand Hall of the Zevran High Council was a marvel of alien architecture, a massive chamber carved from obsidian stone, its ceilings adorned with intricate golden carvings that depicted the Imperium's long history of conquest. Thousands of alien dignitaries filled the chamber, their holographic emissaries beaming in from across the galaxy. At the head of the room sat the Zevaran Emperor, Lord Vorthan, a towering figure draped in flowing crimson robes. His reptilian features remained unreadable as Alexander Kale stepped forward to deliver Earth's final plea for peace. As Adrian watched the live transmission from a secure UTD base, he felt a rare sense of optimism. His father had done the impossible. He had brought humanity to the table of an empire that had never before considered coexistence. Then, everything changed. Just as Alexander Kale began to speak, a single shot rang out. The sound echoed through the chamber. For a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, Adrian saw it, the bright crimson stain spreading across his father's chest. Alexander Kale staggered, his expression one of pure shock. His knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the polished floor of the council chamber. Gasps and whispers rippled through the audience. And then, Lord Vorthan spoke. "Humanity will serve, not negotiate." The moment the words left his lips, chaos erupted. Zevran guards stormed the chamber, opening fire on Earth's delegation. Diplomats and officials were gunned down where they stood. Security personnel tried to fight back, but they were outmatched, their weapons useless against Zevran energy shields. Some tried to flee, only to be incinerated by plasma turrets that emerged from the walls. It wasn't an assassination. It was an execution. Adrian sat frozen, watching the massacre unfold on his screen. His father's lifeless body lay in the center of the chamber, blood pooling around him. The transmission cut out as Zevran forces stormed the human command center on Zevran Prime, wiping out the remaining delegation. The United Terran Dominion had sent its best and brightest in hopes of securing peace. None of them would return. The aftermath, a galaxy in shock. The news of the massacre spread like wildfire. Across Earth and its colonies, protests and riots erupted. The people demanded justice. They demanded war. But Earth's leaders hesitated. The Zevran Imperium was the most powerful force in the galaxy. Their fleets were unmatched, their technology centuries ahead of humanity's. Declaring war would mean total annihilation. Instead, The UTD issued a formal condemnation and recalled its forces to defensive positions. The president addressed the planet, urging restraint, calling for unity. Adrian Kale listened to the speech, feeling nothing but cold, seething rage. His father had believed in peace, and it had gotten him killed. And Earth's leaders? They were too afraid to act. But Adrian wasn't afraid. The birth of a merciless avenger. The world mourned Ambassador Kale. Statues were erected, memorials held, speeches given. But none of it mattered to Adrian. His father's legacy wasn't just stolen, it was mocked. The Zevrans had killed him not just to silence Earth, but to make a statement. Submission or extinction. And Adrian refused to submit. The military wouldn't act. The government wouldn't act. That meant he had to. For weeks, Adrian disappeared from the public eye. Officially, he was in mourning. Unofficially, he was preparing for war. Using his contacts in the Black Spectre Division, he accessed classified intelligence reports, studied Zevran weaknesses, and gathered allies from the fringes of space. He wasn't building an army. He didn't need one. He was a ghost, a shadow that would haunt the Zevrans until their empire crumbled. His father had spent his life trying to save humanity through diplomacy. Now, Adrian would save it through vengeance. And he would start with the man who had killed his father. Lord Vorthan would die screaming. Adrian Kale had disappeared from public view, but he was far from idle. While Earth's leaders debated their next move, paralyzed by fear, Adrian had already decided on his own course of action. He wouldn't wait for Earth to declare war. He was the war. Using his extensive training as a Black Spectre operative, he knew he couldn't challenge the Zevran Imperium in open battle. Their fleets, technology, and armies vastly outmatched anything humanity could muster. But the Zevrans were an empire of control, an iron-fisted regime that ruled over hundreds of subjugated worlds. And Adrian knew that the best way to bring down an empire was from the inside. The ghost in the machine. Adrian's first step was severing all ties with Earth. He became a rogue agent, erasing his identity from UTD records and slipping into the underworld of the galactic black market. If he was going to strike at the Imperium, he needed resources, weapons, and, most importantly, allies who had nothing left to lose. He found them in the dark corners of space, among the broken and the forgotten. The Draken pirates, a mercenary fleet that had been hunted to the edge of extinction by Zevran warships. The Varkai Syndicate, a ruthless network of former slaves who had been abandoned after their worlds were conquered. And the Shardborn, a rogue AI collective that had once been part of the Imperium's neural network before it gained sentience and was declared a threat. Adrian didn't just gather them, he gave them something they had been missing. A purpose. He became more than a man. He became a symbol, a whisper in the dark. Across the Imperium, they started calling him the Shadow Reaper. And he earned that name, striking at the heart of the Imperium. For the next 2 years, Adrian launched a relentless campaign of destruction. Assassinations. High-ranking Zevran officials started dying in their own palaces, their security systems useless against an enemy who could infiltrate their most secure locations. Sabotage. Entire fleets were crippled overnight as cyber-attacks fried their navigation systems, leaving them stranded in deep space. Rebellions. Adrian's forces armed and trained resistance groups across multiple slave worlds, teaching them how to fight back. The Zevran Imperium had never faced an enemy like him. They were used to crushing planets, not fighting a ghost. The Imperial High Command branded him the most dangerous human in the galaxy. Bounties were placed on his head. Armies were dispatched to hunt him down. But they never found him. Because Adrian wasn't fighting a war in the open. He was tearing them apart from the shadows. The turning point, the fall of Valkar Prime. One of Adrian's greatest victories came with the destruction of Valkar Prime, the Imperium's primary shipyard world. Valkar Prime was the heart of the Zevran war machine, responsible for building the battleships that kept the Empire in power. Its security was considered impenetrable. But Adrian had spent months infiltrating its defenses, placing sleeper agents in key positions, bribing corrupt officials, and embedding hacking units within its communication networks. When the time came, he shut down the planetary defense grid in a single instant. A coalition of rebels and mercenaries struck. Explosions tore through shipyards, Billions of credits worth of warships burned in orbit, and the Imperium lost half its naval production capacity overnight. It was the single greatest act of sabotage in Zevran history, and it sent a message to Lord Vorthan himself. Adrian Kale was coming. The Imperium strikes back. The Zevrans couldn't allow Adrian's campaign to continue. If they didn't crush him soon, their empire would collapse. So they changed their tactics. Instead of hunting Adrian, they set a trap. Using false intelligence, they leaked reports that Lord Vorthan would be attending a high-security war council on the remote world of Karnas 4. It was bait, and they knew Adrian couldn't resist. And he didn't. The betrayal on Karnas 4. Adrian assembled his best strike team, a hand-picked squad of operatives who had fought with him since the beginning. They infiltrated Karnas 4 under cover of darkness, bypassing Zevran patrols and reaching the heavily fortified War Council chamber. Everything was going perfectly, until the doors locked behind them. Then the walls shimmered, revealing hidden plasma turrets. The floor panels retracted, releasing automated war drones. The entire mission had been a trap. And standing at the center of the chamber, waiting for him, was Lord Vorthan himself. The Zevran Emperor watched as Adrian's team was slaughtered in seconds. Plasma fire rained down from every angle. Some of his best fighters managed to take cover, but one by one, they fell. Adrian fought with everything he had, moving like a blur, cutting through Zevran warriors with ruthless precision. But the enemy was too many. Then, the worst happened. A single plasma bolt burned through his side, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain shot through his body as he struggled to rise, his vision blurring. His remaining allies were dead. He was alone. Vorthan stepped forward, towering over him. "You thought you could break my empire, human?" the Emperor said, his voice like grinding stone. "You are nothing more than a pest." Adrian clenched his fists, struggling to move, but his body refused to obey. Vorthan raised a clawed hand, and Adrian felt his body lifted into the air, a gravitic field locking him in place. "You have taken much from me," Vorthan growled. "But I will not grant you the mercy of death." With a wave of his hand, the Zevran guards moved in. And then, darkness. Captured by the enemy. When Adrian awoke, he was in a Zevran prison cell. His body was broken, his wounds barely treated. He was deep inside the Imperial Citadel, the most secure fortress in the entire galaxy. Vorthan had spared his life. Not out of mercy, but because he wanted Adrian to suffer. For weeks, they tortured him. They used neural disruptors to invade his mind, trying to break him. They injected him with alien serums, testing his endurance. They wanted him to beg for death. But Adrian Kale never broke. In the deepest pit of Zevran Prime, beneath layers of security, he plotted his next move. They thought they had captured him. They thought the war was over. But they had only made him more dangerous. Because Adrian Kale wasn't just fighting for revenge anymore. He was fighting to end the Imperium itself. And he would escape. And when he did, he would burn their empire to the ground. Adrian Kale had spent months in the depths of Zevran Prime's most secure prison, the Void Bastille. It was a fortress buried beneath the planet's surface, designed to hold the most dangerous enemies of the Imperium. Escape was considered impossible. The guards took turns torturing him, trying to break his mind. They starved him, deprived him of sleep, bombarded his nervous system with electroshock pulses. Every day, they demanded his surrender. But Adrian never surrendered. Even through the agony, his mind remained sharp. He studied the guards' routines, memorized the prison's layout, and counted every second between patrol shifts. He wasn't just surviving. He was waiting. Because he knew something the Zevrans didn't. His people were coming for him. The Shadow Rebellion strikes back. The Zevrans had assumed Adrian's capture would end his rebellion. They were wrong. Without him, the Shadow Rebellion had only grown more powerful. His followers had spread across the Imperium, uniting slaves, exiles, and mercenaries into a single cause, the complete destruction of the Zevran Empire. And now, they were ready to strike. The attack began with a planet-wide blackout. A stolen Zevran warship, modified with shard-born AI, infiltrated the planetary network and shut down Zevran Prime's energy grid for exactly 10 minutes. It was all the time they needed. Explosions erupted across the capital as rebel strike teams attacked key military installations. The Draken pirates unleashed orbital bombardments, crippling the planetary defenses. And at the heart of it all, a small infiltration team descended into the depths of the Void Bastille. Their mission? Extract Adrian Kale. The prison break. The power failure disabled the prison's security barriers just long enough for Adrian's extraction team to blast through the walls of his cell. But Adrian wasn't helpless when they arrived. Despite months of torture, he was still Adrian Kale, the most dangerous human in the galaxy. As the first Zevran guard entered his cell, Adrian struck fast and brutal, snapping the alien's neck in a single motion. With practiced precision, he seized the fallen guard's shock baton and turned it against the others. By the time his rescue team arrived, Adrian was already covered in Zevran blood. "Sir, we're here to get you out," one of the rebels shouted. Adrian wiped a smear of green Zevran blood from his face and grabbed a fallen plasma rifle. "No," he growled. "We're not escaping. We're finishing this." The fall of Zevran Prime. The battle for Zevran Prime had already begun. Rebel forces stormed the Imperial Palace, overrunning Zevran defenses. Warships rained fire from the sky. Slave uprisings erupted across the city as prisoners seized the weapons of their fallen captors. And leading the charge was Adrian Kale. Armed with stolen Zevran weaponry, he tore through enemy forces with brutal efficiency. His movements were calculated, precise, every shot lethal, every strike final. The Zevrans had spent months trying to break him. Now he was breaking them. Adrian and his forces pushed through the burning ruins of the capital, cutting a path toward one final target. Lord Vorthan. The final confrontation. Adrian found Vorthan in the Imperial throne room, surrounded by his elite guards. The Zevran Emperor had not fled. He refused to run from a mere human. "You think you have won?" Vorthan sneered, gripping a ceremonial war staff. "This empire has stood for 10,000 years. Your rebellion is a flickering flame. It will die like all the others." Adrian stepped forward, his plasma rifle aimed directly at Vorthan's head. "You killed my father," he said coldly. "You massacred my people. And you think I'll let you walk away from this?" Vorthan bared his fangs in amusement. "You misunderstand, human. I am not trapped in here with you." He raised his war staff. "You are trapped in here with me." Then the fight began. The Emperor's wrath. Vorthan was no ordinary Zevran. He was a warrior king, a conqueror who had personally led armies in battle. His strength was monstrous, his speed unnatural. His war staff crackled with energy as he swung it toward Adrian. Adrian barely dodged in time, the force of the strike shattering the stone floor where he had stood. The impact sent a shockwave through the throne room, knocking over statues and columns. Vorthan lunged again, striking with inhuman speed. Adrian countered with a burst of plasma fire, but the Emperor's personal energy shield absorbed the shots. Then Vorthan was on him. The war staff slammed into Adrian's ribs, sending him flying into a marble pillar. Pain exploded through his body, but he forced himself to move. Adrian had fought alien warlords before, but Vorthan was on another level. The Emperor's attacks were relentless. Adrian dodged, parried, and countered, but Vorthan was stronger, faster. The fight was turning against him. Then Adrian did something unexpected. He dropped his weapon. Vorthan hesitated for half a second, just long enough. Adrian lunged forward and grabbed the war staff mid-swing, redirecting its momentum. With a brutal twist, he wrenched it from Vorthan's grasp and drove the weapon's crackling energy core straight into the Emperor's chest. The explosion sent them both flying. When the smoke cleared, Adrian was on his knees, gasping for breath. And Vorthan. Vorthan was dying. The end of an empire. The once mighty Emperor of the Zevran Imperium lay on the ground, his body broken, his eyes filled with rage and disbelief. "You cannot win," he rasped. "Even if you kill me, the Imperium will endure." Adrian walked forward, standing over his fallen enemy. "No," he said quietly. "Your empire dies today." Then he fired the final shot, ending Lord Vorthan's reign forever. A new beginning. The fall of Vorthan sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Imperium, without its supreme ruler, collapsed within weeks. Slave worlds rose up in rebellion. Zevran warlords turned on each other. The once mighty empire tore itself apart. And Adrian Kale? He didn't claim power. He didn't declare himself a ruler. He simply disappeared. Some say he returned to Earth. Others believe he ventured beyond known space, seeking a new war to fight. But one thing was certain. The man who had avenged his father had become a legend. A shadow whispered across the stars. The galaxy would never forget the name Adrian Kale. With Lord Vorthan dead, the Zevran Imperium collapsed within weeks. The once mighty empire had ruled for over 10,000 years, but without its supreme leader, it fractured into warring factions. Slave worlds rose in rebellion, their people breaking their chains and executing their former masters. The Imperium's fleets, once feared across the galaxy, turned on each other as Zevran warlords fought for dominance. But Adrian Kale did not stay to watch. As the galaxy celebrated the fall of its most brutal overlords, Adrian disappeared into the void, his mission complete. Or so he thought. The cost of vengeance. Adrian had spent years fighting. Years spent plotting his revenge, cutting down his enemies, and dismantling an empire that had taken everything from him. But in the quiet aftermath, he found himself asking a question he had never considered. What now? Vengeance had consumed him for so long that without it, he felt hollow. He had no home to return to. Earth had distanced itself from his war, fearing retaliation from the remnants of the Imperium. His allies, the rebels, the ex-slaves, the mercenaries, were already moving on, forging their own destinies in the power vacuum he had created. And Adrian. He was alone. A galaxy in chaos. The fall of the Zevran Imperium did not bring peace. It brought chaos. Without a central power governing the Empire's former territories, warlords seized planets, crime syndicates rose to power, and lawlessness spread across the galaxy. Some worlds thrived in their newfound freedom. Others descended into anarchy. The United Terran Directorate, UTD, which had once feared Zevran retaliation, now debated whether to intervene. Some Earth leaders wanted to establish control over the fallen Empire's territories. Others argued that humanity should remain neutral. But there was one undeniable truth. A new war was coming. And Adrian Kale, the man who had started it all, had no place in this new order. The last mission. Adrian had planned to disappear forever, to leave the past behind and fade into the shadows. But then he received a message, one that changed everything. A distress signal, originating from Draconis IV, a former Zevran slave world. It was a message from Kara Thorne, one of his most trusted allies. She had remained behind after the war, helping rebuild shattered civilizations. But now she was calling for help. The warlords who had seized power in the wake of the Imperium's fall were worse than the Zevrans. They weren't conquerors. They were butchers. Slavery had returned. Entire colonies were being burned to the ground. The people Adrian had fought to free were dying all over again. And Kara's final words echoed in his mind. Adrian, if you're out there, we need you. A warrior's return. Adrian had never planned to fight again. But the moment he heard Kara's voice, he knew there was no choice. He had spent years destroying an empire. Now, he would spend the rest of his life protecting those who had survived it. Donning his black armor once more, Adrian took his stolen Zevran warship and set a course for Draconis IV. The warlords who had risen in the Imperium's ashes believed they could rule through terror. But they had forgotten one thing. The Shadow Reaper still lived. And he was coming for them. The legend lives on. As Adrian descended onto Draconis IV, the people who saw his ship whispered his name. To the broken, the enslaved, and the oppressed, he was no longer just a warrior. He was a symbol. A force that would never stop fighting for justice. His war had begun as vengeance for his father. But now, it was something greater. A war without end. A war to protect the innocent. A war to ensure that no tyrant, Zavran or otherwise, would ever rise again. Because Adrian Kale was no longer just a man. He was the reckoning. And across the stars, his legend would never die.